Welcome on this Trinity Sunday in June, Pride Month, this Father's Day. Welcome to Bloor Street and St. Matthew's United Church Faith Communities. It's good to have you here as we reflect on many things in life and in the world with words, with music, with moments of quiet. I've always been kind of drawn to Trinity Sunday, the Sunday after Pentecost, although it is for most people a really hard sell. While most Christian liturgical dates or feasts mark events in the life of Jesus, his birth, his crucifixion, his resurrection, and so on, Trinity Sunday asks us to celebrate an idea, a theological abstraction. And it's an idea that we can't readily wrap our minds around, no matter how hard we try. And ministers do try very hard indeed. Although, as Bishop John Robinson wrote in his best-selling 1967 book, Honest to God, he said, "I was once asked a question after one of my talks. How would you teach a child the doctrine of the Trinity? It was the easiest question I was ever asked. I wouldn't." There are any number of handy analogies that have accumulated in commentaries over the centuries. Ice, water, steam comes to mind. But for me, Julian of Norwich makes the most sense when she suggests that our whole life is in three. First, there is the being, then the becoming, finally the fulfilling. But there's a deeper question too. Why should we care? What difference does this 3-in-1 business make? And we'll spend some time with that today, because I think it's important. How do we speak about the nature of God, about our experience of God in the world today anyway? It's a good question. So welcome to this place and this time together. I'm glad you're here, whether on Zoom or in the sanctuary, because as you know, what happens when we gather, when we are met by God's Spirit in this place, will be different because you're here, because you're a part of it. Have you ever had experiences that opened you to God before you could explain to yourself the meaning of what you had experienced? Experiences that opened you to God before you could explain to yourself the meaning of what you had just experienced. In other words, without references, without footnotes or scriptural proof texts, just raw experience of the holy or the sacred, the awesome, the living mystery, whatever you want to call it. Trinity Sunday is a day to pay particular attention to the mystery of God in our world, because a central and defining part of being the church is the ongoing effort to name God's activity in our world, to notice and give voice to what the Spirit's up to in the world. And what came to be encoded in Creed as the Trinity was the way the followers of Jesus came to express their own distinct and different experience of the divine, of God as holy in the world. And with time, it came to seem to them to be important enough to nail it down. So central it was to their experience of God in Jesus. But the real question today, I think, is not how do we make sense of this doctrine of the Nicene Creed 1,700 years later, but rather, how do we express our experiences, our encounters with God today in our secular, disenchanted world? How do we hear? How do we see God today when we know it's not going to come down etched on stone tablets from a mountainside or in angel choirs or walking on water? My hunch is that it will come in ways that challenge us to be changed somehow in order to get what God's Spirit is trying to tell us about God. And I think the Bible itself indicates over and over and over again that it will come, this ways in which we will learn to speak about God anew will come from unexpected directions, and that it will require us to be both open and discerning. Open to what's coming to us and discerning about which of these is real. It will come from outside, and we will be able to recognize it, to see it and hear it because we have practiced. We've done things like this. We've gathered together. We've wrestled with the old stories. We've talked about our own experiences through the week. We bring that together and we discern what God's up to in the world today. This is the fundamental challenge, I think, that faith communities, churches face today, is encountering God in life, in the world we actually live in, and being able to speak about that in ways that are meaningful and compelling and new in the midst of a secular, scientific, and demystified world. This is what the church was doing when they came up with the Trinity. And it has been formative. It's been important through the centuries, but it doesn't work so well for our needs today. So just to step back, there's a vast gulf between our knowing of God and, well, God. What we know of God and how God is on God's self. And I think humans have always known that, but we have a deep need to express God in terms that we can get our hearts, heads, and souls around. We want to capture God in statues, in temples, in sacred words, in holy places, and creeds that try to fit the divine, the holy, into the scope of our understanding, our way of seeing the world. Of course, if we ever think we have fully captured the divine within our human understanding, that's called idolatry. And we instinctively know that it's probably not a good thing. The divine, the holy, always needs freedom. The freedom to burst our constraints of imagination and thought. In the words of Bishop John Spong, no one can ultimately define God, not even as the Trinity. It's the height of human arrogance to suggest otherwise. All any of us can do is define not God, but our experience with God. That has integrity. There's a vast difference between those two things, between God and our experience with God. And the Trinity is an expression of our experience, nothing more, Spong goes on to say. Anyone who makes this definition of our experience the definition of God and calls it the bedrock belief of Christianity is not well informed. To be clear, the doctrine of the Trinity is not found in the Bible. There are readings in the lectionary for this day that do provide the building blocks of where it came from. For example, Proverbs 8 and Psalm 8 are the sorts of things the authors of the Nicene Creed drew upon. In its time, the Jewish people's experience of God as one was radical, in contrast to a world populated by spirits in great and confusing number that resided in sacred mountains or springs or trees or statues, each jealously guarding their realm. So the Jewish insight into the oneness of God, of the holy, brought a degree of sophistication, a degree of depth to the human understanding of mystery and awe. That beneath the variety and the multiplicity of things that come at us like a fire hose in the world, there's a foundational unity, a spirit, a life force that creates and nurtures and is dependable, who's not chaotic and unpredictable, but is one with whom we can build a relationship. At this point, we're going to read Proverbs 8 and Psalm 8 and hear how those words shaped an understanding of God, and then we'll continue. Liz.
The poetry about wisdom in the book of Proverbs is many-layered when read in the context of our own contemporary setting. When truth is up for grabs in an information marketplace that is both crowded and poisoned. The book of Proverbs was compiled over the course of 4 centuries, between 1,000 and 600 years before the Common Era. Wisdom here is personified as a woman. She exists prior to the creation of the cosmos, in other words, before the beginning of the earth, and she is to be found in the midst of the hustle and bustle of our daily lives. The poem begins with wisdom situated at the crossroads of the public square, making her appeal to all who pass by. Her voice is commanding, urgent, and trustworthy. She offers her instruction to all that live, that we might acquire the discernment to follow wisdom's ways. And so our reading today is Proverbs 8, verses 1 to 4 and 22 to 31. Doesn't wisdom cry out and understanding shout atop the heights along the path at the crossroads? She takes her stand. By the gate before the city, at the entrances she shouts, I cry out to you people, my voice goes out to all of humanity. The Lord created me at the beginning of his way. Before his deeds long in the past, I was formed in ancient times, at the beginning before the earth was. When there was no watery depths, I was brought forth. When there was no springs flowing with water, before the mountains were settled, before the hills I was brought forth. Before God made the earth and the fields, or the first of the dry land, I was there when he established the heavens, when he marked out the horizon of the deep sea, when he thickened the clouds above, when he secured the fountains of the deep, when he set a limit for the sea, so the water couldn't go beyond his command, when he marked out the earth's foundations. I was beside him as a master of crafts. I was having fun, smiling before him all the time, frolicking with his inhabited earth, and delighting in the human race. Now let us read responsively Psalm 8, found in Voices United 732. We will begin by singing the refrain. O God, our God, how glorious is your name in all the earth. From the lips of infants and children, your praises reach up to the heavens.
You have set up a stronghold against your foes, to quell the enemy and the avenger. O God, our God, how glorious is your name.
when I look to the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars you have set in their places. You have made us little less than divine and crowned us with glory and honor.
You have made us rulers over all your creation and put all things under our feet.
All sheep and cattle, all creatures of the wild.
The birds of the air and the fishes of the sea and all that make their way through the waters.
God is still speaking. Thanks be to God.
We imagine that people just naturally spoke of God in those ways in Proverbs and in the Psalms, but we don't realize how different it was from the way others spoke about God, the God's holiness and mystery in life. They had to figure out how to do that. They had to find words. Then with Jesus, that whole experience of God, that perception of the sacred took on additional layers. See, there was this intimacy to Jesus' relationship with God. He didn't just placate God. He didn't just try to please God. Jesus talked with God often and with deep familiarity and knowingness. And he didn't do it in the temple. Through Jesus, people sensed God come close. A God who was concerned with whether they were hungry or not, whether they were exploited or not, whether they were sick or not. And in Jesus, they could see that these things matter to God. God wanted to build a relationship to make things better for them. So they came to extend this relational experience of God, of being with God, to God's own inner life as a dynamic, flowing dance of interrelated parts. And more than that, this relational dance of God within God's self is big enough to include us, to include the created. For a couple of centuries, the apparent contradictions of God in Jesus, God in the Spirit, God alongside as creator sat comfortably, if a little messily, next to each other. It was a little rough around the edges, this picture of God that was developing. But the different ways of expressing divine diversity and unity were not in significant conflict. After all, it's right there from the beginning, the Genesis account of creation, the creation of all things. It does not say, let me make humankind in my own image. It says, let us make humankind in our own image, according to our likeness. Not a solitary me God, but a communal we God. But empires, empires don't form unity out of creative diversity. The unity of an empire comes not through some creative interplay of diverse views, but rather by settling on one view, the emperor's view, and then forcing everyone else to hold to those beliefs too. So when the Emperor Constantine called all the bishops to the Council of Nicaea in 325, and as I said, its 1700th anniversary is being marked this very year, they arrived with a diversity of different views about how to talk about God, but they left with just one, the Nicene Creed. There were 3 holdouts among the bishops who didn't fully consent to the language of this agreement, so the emperor exiled them and had their writings burned. That's how empires do creeds. Today, while the Nicene Creed is not a staple in the life of even the most committed Christians, a lot of people do read the Bible that way, as a literal book of answers. We want this thing that helps anchor us, that puts constraints on things so that we're under control. We want this book as a literal book of answers with a topical index. But that's not what the Bible represents either. It's a collection of books intended to cultivate wisdom, the lifelong process of maturing us into disciples who wander purposely along the unmapped path of faith, in tune with the presence of God along the way. It's a process. The Bible itself speaks of as we've just heard, of the diversity of ways of understanding the nature of God that existed before Nicaea. And the Bible is throughout pretty ambiguous. It's not all that clear about what we should actually do and think, but it's constantly inviting us to work that out for ourselves in our own lives. And the Bible is diverse. It does not speak with one voice on most issues. It invites us to cultivate wisdom, to work it out in living a faithful, meaningful life in community with others. My own unauthorized view is that essentially creeds and doctrines developed because Jesus was so hard to pin down, to codify. As the Gospels, all 4 of them, show, he was not all that clear about what we should do and think. He handed it back to us over and over and over again to work it out, which is, again, a wisdom task. Diversity and ambiguity are not problems to be overcome or solved. They tell us something about the character of biblical faith. The Bible, like Jesus, presents us with an invitation we can't refuse, an invitation to join an ancient and sacred quest to follow the path of wisdom, with no accompanying checklist of solutions, no safety net of pre-scripted responses, and no fear of God bringing down the hammer on us when we get it wrong. Wisdom's not about being smart. It's not intellect to the highest degree. Wisdom is that depth quality of understanding that happily lives alongside mystery and doubt and unknowing. Wisdom is beyond information, data, facts, and endless arguments about who has their facts straight. Wisdom is about meaning. It's about truth, the truth of life that transforms us and that makes us whole. But as I said at the beginning, so what? I mean, really, in a turbulent world where missiles rain down on Tehran and Tel Aviv and Khan Yunis and Kyiv, where populist politicians are turning economics into some kind of guessing game, when people are wrestling with the immense stresses and pressures of everyday life, I'm not being trite when I say, so what? The so what question is an essential one for the church. We're barely able to grasp a meaningful belief in God, let alone getting waylaid by whether it's 1 or 3 or whatever. I like something that the Franciscan author and contemplative Richard Rohr says in his book, The Divine Dance, the Trinity and Your Transformation. He says, don't start with the 1 and try to make it into 3. Start with the 3 and see that this is the deepest nature of the 1. In other words, start with the diversity and see it as the expression of a deep unity within everything. because then we will be opened up to experiences of God as dynamic, that God's very nature, God's self, is fluid. God moves, or to use Richard Rohr's language again, God flows, God is flow. God dances, God is dance. We seek to follow a God who is always on the move, always spilling over, always organic, always a surprise. Unity, that deep principle of oneness at the heart of all things, does not require God to be rigid or formulaic. Goodness, Rohr writes, goodness to be goodness needs contrast and tension, not perfect uniformity. And if God can incarnate goodness through contrast and tension, then it's worth asking why we can't, in a world of complexity, experience and express our encounters with God's Spirit in the world in ways that are multifaceted and inclusive. In ways that say this vision of a faith community in the world is not only an expression of how we live God's love, it's an expression of the very nature of the God we love, are in relationship with, and worship. God alive in the world. We are seeking to be faithful followers in this place of a mysterious, fluid, diverse, communal, hospitable, and loving God who wants to guide us into the truth of who God is amidst all the religious debates and conflicts, the truth of who God is and of who we are. And there's a mystery within this that is transformational, that I think for our faith communities of Bloor Street and St. Matthew's can be inspiring again, joyful, even playful, and hopeful for a bewildered and divided world, that at the heart of God is unity and it's dancing with us. May it be so. Amen. Friends, the kingdom of love is coming because somewhere someone is kind when others are unkind. Because somewhere someone shares with another in need. Because somewhere someone refuses to hate when others hate. Somewhere someone is patient and waits in love. Because somewhere someone serves another in love. The kingdom of love is coming because somewhere someone is calm in a storm. Go in peace and hope and love. Amen.